Hello, I'm Colin Millar, and today I will be giving my vlog presentation of the amazing book known as The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is simply a tale about Dorian Gray and his life and how, by trying to achieve ultimate beauty and pure youth, he eventually becomes corrupted and his soul eventually becoming destroyed. Dorian Gray is an innocent, youthful person who eventually interacts with Basil and Lord Henry. Through this interaction, he learns that Basil made this very beautiful portrait, which he wishes that he could look like. Realizing that he's going to age and eventually wrinkle away, he wishes his soul to be like this painting, forever lasting, youthful. Dorian Gray eventually finds love with an actress known as Sybil, who is someone he met in the theater. With this, he eventually falls in love with Sybil and proposes to her, and she says yes. But eventually, after realizing that Sybil was going to quit being an actress and that he only loved the acting side of her, he eventually calls off the wedding. This eventually leads to Sybil killing herself and committing suicide, but also the painting of Dorian Gray, or the painting based on Dorian Gray that Basil made, to be slowly deteriorated. Noticing this deterioration by Dorian Gray, not only does he decommission this painting to make sure no one ever sees it, but he eventually reads a book about how sometimes being insincere can actually lead you to revealing more personalities. Believing this to be true, he starts being insincere, but as a result, the painting gets more and more destroyed for an unexplained supernatural reason. After committing mass atrocities, 18 years has passed, and Dorian Gray actually interacts with Basil again. In an effort to showcase his real personality to Basil, Dorian Gray shows the portrait that he kept back to Basil. And Basil realizes that this portrait is completely destroyed. It shows a very ugly figure, and Dorian Gray, being very mad at Basil's reaction, murdered him, causing the hands of the portrait to start bleeding red. He does everything he can to hide the body and to destroy the body, even pulling cards such as blackmail to convince an acquaintance of him to get rid of the body and eventually destroy it using chemistry. He decides to go to an opioid club that he tends to go to very often. He interacts with someone known as James, who turns out to be Sybil's brother with the quest to kill Dorian Gray. Using lies, Dorian Gray simply states that it's impossible for him to be this man who wronged James' sister. He can't possibly be this young. Eventually, James finds this house, and Dorian goes into hiding. But a few days later, due to a hunting accident, James dies. Seeing the death of James as possibly something of destiny, Dorian tries to do a good act in order to make the painting look eventually nicer. Not causing the innocence of a girl he met to go to waste, he realizes that the painting can't actually be fixed, so he decides to destroy the painting. Taking the knife that he used to kill Basil, he eventually stabs the painting, but the effects actually reversed, eventually ending up with Dorian Gray withered on the floor as an old man while the painting turned back to its original youthful state. We're going to go more into the details of what makes this book so great and stand out overall. First of all, the entire metaphor of how, in reality, the inner self was represented by this portrait was very important to note. Every single action that Dorian Gray made, which caused actually the damage to your soul, was represented in this painting. Throughout the story specifically, many conversations between Lord Henry and Dorian Gray was talked about specifically with the soul. Even though Lord Henry didn't believe that a soul actually existed, Dorian insisted on the fact that our soul actually exists, even regardless of how corrupted his was. The way this painting changed over time also was a very important indication throughout the novel. When Dorian Gray first breaks off the engagement with Sybil, the portrait decides to have a crooked smile. This was an indication that his soul wasn't completely tainted, but problems were arising. But as time moved on and he killed Basil, the portrait took a very dark turn, actually showing blood dripping from the hand of the portrait. This representation shows how each action that he did sometimes more weight than the others, causing more damage to the painting at some points and less damage at other points. His soul wasn't just completely damaged, but damaged at small intervals and into big, giant, massive steps, which caused his soul to eventually be destroyed as seen at the ending of the book. The way Oscar Wilde also introduces the character of Dorian Gray is very interesting, because it seems like he's trying to tell us a tale of regardless of where you start, your bad actions will eventually lead you to go down a terrible path, regardless of how good you were at the start. Dorian Gray is portrayed by Basil in this time as an amazing human being, genuine, innocent, and filled with youth and happiness. But due to the corruption of people around him, and rather than analyzing what other people are saying and having a thought for your own, Dorian Gray simply followed what Lord Henry had to say, eventually leading him down a dark devil path due to Lord Henry's influence and eventual realization of the Yellow Book that tainted him so much by causing him to be insincere. This book was able to create a scarring tale that most likely won't be able to actually get out of my mind for a very long time. The specific imagery that Oscar Wilde used to sometimes display the portrait, along with how Dorian Gray is changing over time, will stick into my head. I still have that image of that blood-soaked hand on the portrait, and for some reason it can never get out of my mind. But overall, this book helps showcase sometimes the problems that we have as humans, but in reality how those problems can lead to the downfall of the individual rather than society itself. And that will end my vlog for today, but thank you very much for listening to this, and hopefully you learned a little something and saw a little bit of a deeper analysis of this great book from an ancient time.